Oh Lord, it's Aquapolis time. There is a lot to talk about in this set. A lot of big hitters, some great support, and of course, a lot of underrated and overlooked cards. So much so that I don't even know how to put a number to the cards I'm going to be talking about, as you may have noticed in the title of this video and how it differs from the other underrated videos. As always, let's first set the benchmark for what makes a good Aquapolis card by looking at the best cards in the set. For these, I would tag both Exeggutor, Houndoom, Seer, Espeon, and Umbreon. There's even an argument to be made that Seer is the single best card in E-Card. Porygon 2 and Furret are both amazing support Pokemon from this set, and we can't forget staple supporter cards Town Volunteers and Pokemon Fan Club. As for the worst card in the set, we can give that to Crystal Kingdra, for the simple fact that even if you ignore the ridiculous energy requirements of this Kingdra, it's still worse in every way than the other Kingdra that already exists in Aquapolis. But the Crystal type cards aren't really meant to be competitive anyway, so yeah, whatever. Now that we've set the standard, let's get into the cards I feel are underrated and underappreciated in Aquapolis. I guess a good starting point is a card type that a lot of players may not even know ever existed. Let's talk about some cubes. The cubes are all technical machines. They are not item cards, so in an expanded format you could attach a technical machine and a focus band or a strength charm. And the rule box equivalent just states that you can only attach this TM to a Pokemon of the corresponding type. So this is a metal cube, you can only attach it to a metal Pokemon. And I think that this individual mechanic, which is different from an item card attachment or any other type of trainer card that we've kind of seen up to this point, was a solid addition to the game, especially in the E-card sets where big basic Pokemon were heavily depowered, and the focus was instead shifted mainly to Stage 2 Pokemon that had big hitting attacks with high energy costs. The technical machines gave you some attacking options for keeping those big Stage 2 Pokemon with the high HP, but also being able to attack with smaller attacks and not just having to build up to the 3 or 4 energy cost attack that the deck is built around. For example, let's look at Skyridge Steelix. Even though it's a stage 1, this deck is going to get slowed down by the fact that on turn 2, when you evolve from Onix into Steelix, you're not going to be able to attack. Its lowest attack costs 3 energy. Well, you can attach Metal Cube 01 onto Steelix and still get off a decent attack. For 1 energy, you're able to gust a Pokemon off of your opponent's bench into the active position before dealing that 10 damage. If you're dead set on running a Steelix deck, then Metal Cube opens up a lot of versatility that it wouldn't have otherwise. Unfortunately, the technical machines do get discarded at the end of your turn. The Fighting Cube gives you a 1 energy attack in Violent Rage where you flip a coin for each damage counter that you have on that Pokemon, and for each heads you deal 10 damage. It's not an astounding attack by any means, but it is great for fighting type decks that have big energy attacks and no low energy attacks, like Nidoking. Ideally, you're going to be evolving up into Nidoking on turn 3, in which you're not even going to be able to use its giant horn attack. Luckily, you do have Fighting Cube that you can attach on there and get off a pretty decent Violent Rage. Since Nidoking has pretty high HP, you can get some good mileage out of a Violent Rage. Water Cube gives you a nice sniping attack in Splatter, which can add some versatility to water decks and cleaning up the bench, or at least setting up a benched Pokemon for a future KO. Grass Cube similarly just gives you a super solid attack for 1 energy, automatic, sleep, and poison. I don't know if you're going to find a grass deck that this doesn't work with, but it also helps add to the viability of less playable cards like Ariados, or even the Arbok that we talked about in the Underrated Expedition video. In my opinion, the most relevant of all of the cubes is the Darkness Cube, and that's mainly within the context of a greater metagame, not just E-Card, but Base to Skyrim or Neo-On. For 1 Darkness energy, you deal 10 damage, but before doing damage, discard any trainer cards attached to the defending Pokemon, and that is key in that you're discarding the trainer before damage, because Plunder gives you an option to work around Focus Band. One of the most annoying cards to deal with in any format that includes Neo Genesis. Plunder provides a pretty evil option to cards like Genesis Murkrow and Genesis Sneasel because you're not just looking at discarding focus bands, this discards any trainer cards. So it's also going to get rid of highly used cards like Goldberry, Balloonberry, Defender. There are other cubes that I don't have much to say about. I just wanted to take a few minutes to give a little credit to the old cubes. Now, technical machines have reappeared in the TCG, but they're just straight up called technical machines or TMs. They're not really labeled as cubes. So the cubes themselves are a little bit more of a TCG relic at this point. And while we're talking about trainer cards that you attach to your Pokemon that aren't tool cards, let's go ahead and spend a minute on Weakness Guard. If Pokemon had sideboards, this is a card that would go in a lot of sideboards. It's just so dependent on matchups and coverage. As long as Weakness Guard is attached to your Pokemon, that Pokemon has no weakness, but at the end of your turn you have to discard Weakness Guard. It's like a pumped up defender. But because it's not a tool card, you can have Weakness Guard and a tool attached to the same Pokemon. The one deck archetype that I have seen Weakness Guard played in repeatedly is Scizor. Scizor does not appreciate being O-coded by fire types, and in steel-heavy formats, like with Genesis Steelix or Aquapolis Scizor, competitive decks are gonna be packing a fire-type answer to those decks. Even thinking in an expanded format like WotC 20, Weakness Guard could be a deciding factor between a Blastoise Rain Dance deck and a Rocket Zapdos deck. The problem with Weakness Guard is that it is so situational that a lot of times it's just going to be taking up space in your deck when you don't actually need it in there. That's why I said it would be such a good sideboard card, and that's the same reason that it keeps it out of most decks and out of people's minds when they're thinking about card viability. Next on the underrated list is Muck, which has this trade-off of having a really nice attack and a really bad Pokebody. Ideally, you want to have 2 grass energy attached to Muck whenever you use Burning Sludge to increase the chances of inflicting both burn and poison on your opponent's active. But having those grass energy on there also means that Muck's retreat cost becomes 3 instead of 1. But any deck running this Muck is not going to care because you're going to have built-in options like Switch and Warp Point. It's more important to have those grass energy on there because Burning Sludge is a way underrated attack, I think. For 2 grass energy, let's go ahead and get that out there. It's gonna have to be grass for it to be good. Flip a coin for each grass attached, it's gonna be 2, so you have 2 50% chances of inflicting both poison and burn on your opponent's defending Pokemon. The odds are in your favor for inflicting both of those, so Burning Sludge is not only going to deal 10, it's also going to deal a guaranteed 10 poison damage between turns, a potential 20 damage off of burn, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on your opponent to get their active back onto the bench and get out of those special conditions, or evolve up or remove it from play, any of those things that would get rid of it. With that attack being so good, why didn't it see play? Well, Beedrill does it better. Even Arbok arguably does it better. But let's not forget the greatest bonus to using Aquapolis Muck is that you also get to include Aquapolis Grimer in your deck, which has some of the most standout artwork from the entire set. This little guy's going full Patrick Star. Let's move on and talk about Magneton. First off, let's just recognize that this is a Steel-type Magneton, so it can fully benefit from special metal energies, but Steel Wave is an attack that you can get off for 3 colorless. Dealing 30 for 3 isn't great, but the effect is pretty unique, especially for its time, where it's also going to deal 10 damage to each benched Pokemon that shares a card type with the active Pokemon. So if you are up against a mono fire deck or a mono grass deck, odds are you're going to be dealing some chip damage to the bench too. Now, a lot of decks do run a variety of types, especially with support Pokemon, so the usability and power of Steel Wave is going to vary depending on your matchup, which is why it's on the underrated list. Even more so, Magneton's Poke Power, Magnetic Flow, where once during your turn, if Magneton is in the active position, you can flip a coin, and if heads, you can pick 1 energy attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon and an energy attached to another one of your opponent's Pokemon, and switch them. How would this ever be useful? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is if your opponent made the mistake of putting an energy on a ferret, you can take a special metal off of a Scizor, attach to that ferret, and then stick some random energy onto Scizor. Just in general, when you're up against decks that use multiple types of Pokemon, multiple types of energy, you can just move energy onto Pokemon that they're not going to be able to utilize. In that way, this deck kind of has the opposite of synergy with itself, whatever that would be. It's a very conflicting card because Steel Wave is looking to deal more damage when you're up against mono-type decks, but Magnetic Flow kind of works best when against multi-type decks. Even so, it's a pretty unique card. I like both the power and the attack. It's so variable in how well this card's going to perform depending on the matchup that usability is always going to suffer. I really like Nidoking from Aquapolis. I've tried to make it work in some more rogue type decks, but haven't really nailed down a deck list for that yet. Giant Horn is just an okay attack, 50 damage for 4 energy, possibly 80. Not exactly worth loading 4 energy onto Nidoking for. Instead, you're going to be looking more to use its Pokemon power, Earth Rage. Once during your turn, if Nidoking is in your active position, you can flip a coin. If you hit heads, you get to put a damage counter on all of your opponent's benched Pokemon. A very good Pokemon power that can be abused if you have multiple Nidoking in play, because you can move one into the active position, use Earth Rage, then retreat it to the bench for another Nidoking, use that Nidoking's Earth Rage. The problem is there's only so many Warp Energy and Warp Point and Switch that you can fit into a deck on top of the Nidoking line and whatever support Pokemon you need, and stacking spread damage is a pretty slow way to get KOs. Nidoking does have 110 HP, so odds are you're going to be able to get off at least a couple of Earth Rages per Nidoking, which can help you stack up that energy. It's still a pretty slow process though. So we'll give a special underrated shout out to Aquapolis Steelix as well, because it's probably the best partner I've been able to find for Nidoking. So Nidoking is going to be in your active position using Earth Rage to hopefully hit heads and stack some damage counters on your opponent's bench. Once it's used its Pokemon power, you can retreat it to the bench, put Steelix in the active position, and use Earth Rift. Steelix also has high HP, can utilize special metal energy to make it even bulkier, and Earth Rift has good synergy with Earth Rage. The main problem is that these are both very bulky boys, and their retreat costs are kind of unworkable without the help of your various switching mechanics. Next on the list is actually a supporter card, Seer. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck. If you find any basic energy cards there, put them right into your hand. So this card really only works for decks that run a lot of basic energy. Not a ton of those in any format that you'd be able to use Seer, just because special energy works so highly used. The reason it makes the list is for its viability in more expanded formats. Really, all I have to say is Rain Dance, and you immediately see why Seer could be a very good supporter card for certain decks. Now we're getting into the good stuff. Octillery, one of my favorite cards to use from Aquapolis, mainly because it can lead to some very quick rage quits on TCG1, especially against decks like Beedrill that heavily rely on free retreat. Octillery's Pokébody suction cups make it so that when your opponent's Pokemon retreats to the bench, it has to discard all energy attached to it. So it's not just free retreaters like Beedrill and Rapidash that are going to have to give up some energy just to make it back onto the bench, but it's also Pokemon that are used to retreating for only 1 energy, and now it's just all energy. Remember, E-Card is a format that revolves around big Stage 2 Pokemon with a lot of energy attached to them, and so they don't take kindly to this Octillery. It forces them to use cards like Warp Energy and Switch, or to just stay in the active position and rearrange the strategy. In which case, Octillery also has an answer in Smokescreen, a 3 energy attack that's dealing 40 damage, and it's got the classic Smokescreen effect of if your opponent tries to attack you next turn, they have to flip a coin, and if tails, that attack does nothing. So not only are you trapping them in the active position, you're also making them flip a coin to attack, like Octillery was some kind of god-dang baby Pokemon. There's not exactly the basis for an Octillery archetype or anything, but it is a phenomenal card for rogue decks. The next entry on this list is both Lanturns. They both provide some really nice versatility to water decks and electric decks. Any electric deck that wants some fire type coverage is going to love Lantern because you don't have to add anything other than the Chinchou and the Lantern. It's essentially just an electric type Pokemon that can hit for water weakness, but it can also help cover for the fighting type weakness that most electric type cards have. This Lantern is weak to grass, and so you do have an alternate attacking method there as well, even if it's not fire you're trying to hit specifically. The electric type Lantern is another solid attacking stage 1. Electric Tackle can deal 40 damage for 2 energy, with the possibility of dealing 20 to yourself. Its real magic though comes from its power ion coating, which can transform all of the lightning energy attached to your active Pokemon into water energy, which can make it viable to run a bunch of water type Pokemon in your pure electric deck and not have to switch up the energy type. The primary application for this being Articuno and Suicune. Nothing's stopping you from attaching a bunch of lightning energy from your hand to either of these Pokemon, and then whenever you want to attack with them, you just use ion coating to transform all of those lightning into water, and you're all good. But even Lantern sees some play every now and then. One card that I never see that I do feel is highly overrated, that's why it tops this list, is Jumpluff. It's easy to write it off pretty quick just because it's a stage 2 Pokemon with only 70 HP. It's also weak to fire and is a grass type in a metagame that is chock full of powerful grass types. But it also has free retreat, resistance to water, and a built-in baby rule as a Pokebody. All you need to do to activate Fluff is attach a rainbow energy onto Jumpluff. As long as it has 1 damage counter on it, every time your opponent attempts an attack towards Jumpluff, they have to flip a coin, and if tails, that attack fails. Then you can use that 1 energy attached to Jumpluff to deal either 0, 30, or 60 damage, which averages out pretty well for a 1 energy attack on a Pokemon that can stall your opponent for as many turns as it takes them to flip a heads. Because Jumpluff requires 1 energy to attack and really no support Pokemon to evolve up and get Cotton Punch set up, that means there's a lot of room in your deck for extra disruption and stall, like your Energy Removal 2, Pokemon Reversal, and Pokemon Nurse. It's not as bulky or heavy hitting as a lot of other stage 2 decks, but if you're able to stall them out and hit your coin flips right, then this Jumpluff can actually be a threat. The 70 HP doesn't matter when your opponent's just trying to OHKO you and they can't because of Fluff. And you're not going to be OHKOing anything yourself, but those little splashes of chip damage are going to stack up over time, especially with the ability to heal Jumpluff, discard that 1 energy, and just attach another energy on there. This underrated video was a bit longer and disorganized than usual, so I appreciate you hanging in there and watching all the way till the end. As always, I would like to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Tell me what cards you think are underrated. Are there any cards you feel are missing from my list? Do you have any experiences with the cards I've talked about in this video? Social media links are in the description, and I will see you next video.